So welcome, our remarkable colleague Mujtaba. We so appreciate your leadership and solidarity. And as always at SETC, we begin all things by giving thanks to our creator, our sustainer. We give thanks to all the original stewards of the various lands we're on. We give thanks to all our ancestors, all those who toiled, our compassion or compensation. We give thanks to all our elders and community stalwarts whose shoulders we stand on as we build, share, and learn together for our collective liberation and sovereignty. So Mujtaba, can you please introduce yourself to our listeners and viewers and share a bit about your remarkable work?
Oh, no, thank you. It's my pleasure to be part of this. And that was a fantastic thing where you said we have to give thanks. I do appreciate that kind of thinking. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Mujtaba Khalid. Currently, I'm a Mason Fellow at the Harvard Kennedy School where I'm pursuing an MPA. My background is finance and developmental finance. For the past 8 years before joining the Harvard MPA, I was heading the Islamic finance department at the BIBF, which is part of the Central Bank of Bahrain, and I was board member of the Central Bank of Bahrain's Waqf Fund. But I worked in the UK, Malaysia, even a bit in Pakistan, where I'm originally from. And currently, I have a startup. So one of the things which I saw in my work was that we try to do a lot of developmental work, but one strata of developmental economics or developmental work was being largely ignored. I'm not saying completely ignored, but largely ignored. And this is where we had projects in Africa, Central Asia, Southeast Asia. So this was all across. And that was financial inclusion, but for small scale farmers. So if you look at the global map and you look at the global map for financial inclusion, you'll see most of the areas or communities or countries which have low levels of financial inclusion are agri-based. And I was looking at the numbers last week. 25% of the GDP of these small scale countries is attributable to or these developing countries is attributable to small scale farmers. And the World Economic Forum, for example, says the world has 600 million small scale farmers, which produce up to 40% of our food supply. So you can see how important this effort is, but it's largely ignored. And for that end, last year, just before I was about to join Harvard, I set up a startup which works, and I'll talk about it in more detail later, but which gives digital credit to small scale farmers, but also helps increase their yield using data analytics.
That's an incredible intro. I really appreciate you providing such context in terms of your background, where you're from, where you've worked, the projects you're working on, and some data. 600 million farmers globally, 40% of our food supply. So once again, I really appreciate data at SETC is a love language of ours. And my wife does a lot of work in agroecology, so I'm sure she'll appreciate you amplifying the work of the folks that provide us sustainability and some form of liberation, because food security and food sovereignty is one of the biggest challenges I think that we face globally. And the fact that farmers aren't really respected and have to consistently protest and fight for rights, which are a lot of times should just be offered and be supported. So once again, I really appreciate you amplifying the work of those vulnerable, distinct groups that require acknowledgments and as far as I'm concerned, should be honored and revered. So my question to you right now is, what's inspiring you? What has you curious, or what's keeping you up at nights?
Geez, a lot of things these days. And I don't want to go with the cliche of AI, because Elon Musk has spoken too much on that, so I won't talk about that. But I'll come on to something more basic. And especially because, and I'm sure as you've also traveled in developing countries, you see, and being raised in Pakistan, right? And having worked in a lot of developing countries or having projects in a lot of developing countries, the fact that the disparity between the haves and the have-nots has grown so significantly and so much that to the extent that and I'll go on to a quote with someone said to me, and I don't remember who the quote is by, but one of my friends told me was that what if the cure for cancer is in the brain of a child who didn't have the opportunity to get educated, right? So, and this is where it comes to why I talk about small scale farmers and why it's passionate about small scale farmers. Because imagine if you improve just 20 to 30% the yield of small scale farmers, if you make them more productive, you're not, like I told you, 25% of global the GDP of developing countries. If you increase that by 20%, there's a development impact. But then you have these farmers who are 20-30% more productive. They can spend on the education of their children. They can feed them, because stunted growth in the newborns of the people who are really at the base of the pyramid, or they're really at the bottom of the pyramid, is something which is, again, a big issue. So all of these things, when I travel, not to the Western Europe or the America or whatever, but when I travel to developing countries, one of the things I see, and especially as a parent, this impacts you. So maybe 10 years ago or something, it might not impact me as it does now. When I see kids who are born with not the same, not even half of the same opportunities with people, compared to kids of people who are, let's say, in the top, not even the 1%, right? Not even the 1%, the top 30% or 20%, right? Because the disparity has increased so much. There are other things like, will the robots take over and everything? But I think what really keeps me up is those things. It doesn't matter if the robots take over, if there are no humans left, in the sense of um, to farm, to produce, to have all of these things, the services we take so much for granted. Sometimes, when I again am in developed countries and I see people throw out food, right? It's like the way I was brought up and the way some of us were brought up, just throwing away food. And even in some a lot of religions, wastage of food, for example, is condemned. You see, so these kinds of things are, I think, more important, in my humble opinion, than worrying about whether the robots will take over. We should worry about that as well, but I think personally it's the basic things we need to get right before we start thinking about those things.
Indeed, indeed. I couldn't agree more. We need to find ways and means to, even if we're just throwing out food, compost, soil science, agroecology, frameworks where if we have to create waste, the waste is recycled and renewed, and creates or supports some of the biodiversity loss that we have on the planet. And if anything, reanimates and restabilizes some of the soil that's just being obliterated across the planet, which creates dynamic where a lot of small farmers and folks in the margins of what folks call emerging markets, developing nature and nations are struggling with. So once again, I couldn't agree more. And this is really important work. And I really love the fact that you just highlighted some of the disparities of children and youth globally in terms of opportunity provision and meaningful, sustainable opportunities. That piece specifically around the cure for cancer could be in the mind of a child that's doesn't have access to educational attainments. So once again, I just appreciate your candor, your leadership, visionary leadership, and authenticity. So my next question: what challenges and barriers are you facing in your work, and what are some of the approaches you and your colleagues are taking to overcome some of these challenges and barriers?
I mean, one of the biggest barriers would be, and that's not just for us, a lot of financial institutions as well. In fact, there are two. One is, excuse me, the current financial system. It should be more inclusive, but it's exclusive, and I'll explain why. So, for example, if someone can show they have a good source of income, then they're seen as low risk, right? So they have, actually, when they go to a bank for a loan or financing, they have access. They already have a good source of income. They can unlock more wealth, so to say. If I have assets, then I'm even a lower risk, right? Now, all of these things in conventional finance, these are things the risk models of these banks are built upon, right? And these are very exclusionary, because what do the people who really need financing don't have? A good source, a steady source of income and assets, right? But the other thing is, how do we get to them? So that's one thing of looking at it, right? The other thing was, how do we get to them? Because again, I do understand that some of these banks are for profit. So setting up a bank branch in rural Pakistan, which has, like, no road access and like maybe 50 customers, does not also make sense, right? For them, right? Because again, even from a economic sense, it's not sustainable, right? Because someone has to bankroll that, and who will do that? And this is what's interesting. This is where we leverage technology. Now, everywhere from Africa to Central Asia to Southeast Asia, people, the penetration of smartphones has increased tremendously, and the access to internet has also increased tremendously. So you have something which you can get to them through, and this is something we're working on. Instead of them coming to us or financial institutions, how can we go to them? How can we not only provide them with financing, and that's how we give them digital finance. So the app or the startup I work on called Bagi, it gives digital credit, right? So you cannot use that credit anywhere, but we have pre-approved vendors where they can go. And those, so for example, the other thing what our app does is it breaks down the steps the farmer needs to follow to ensure optimal yield. So for example, it will say, okay, your geolocation is in a village in Punjab of Pakistan. So we know what the soil type is, the water type is. So we say, okay, every week you have to do this step, right, to ensure optimal yield. So if next week he or she, the farmer, needs 3 bags of urea, and a QR code is generated just for those 3 bags to ensure another risk management metrics that they don't just get the money and then they're irresponsible. And again, I don't want to say that farmers are irresponsible, but obviously for our investors and for ourselves, we have to build in risk management mechanisms. So and then if we see that they're following each of the steps properly, then the next step is unlocked. So if they followed the previous step, only then can they get access to the next tranche of financing, and that's how we're doing it. So this is one of the challenges we're facing. We're trying to deal with. The other is, instead of an interest-based model, we're going on a partnership model, right? So an interest-based, if someone wants $100, I tell them, here's $100 at, let's say, 10% interest rate. Return this money to me in 6 months. So at this end of the 6 months, I expect you to pay or someone to pay me the $100 plus the 10% or the $10, so $110. I don't care how they get it. I don't care what they do to get it. I just want the money back. And if they can't, then banks do their legal proceedings. You'll have to declare bankruptcy and so on and so forth. But what if we could build a financial model which is a partnership-based financial model? Whereby I say, look, here's $100. I'll partner with you in this transaction or this business activity. You don't have to give me equity or anything. We're just partnering in this cycle or transaction. Whatever you make on this $100, we'll share the profits 50-50. So what that means is if you make $10, I get 5, you get 5. If you make $50, I get 25, you get 25. And so I'm linking the person's success to my success. I will ensure that that person does well, because at the end of the day, if he or she does well, I'll do well. And there are examples. For example, I met the CEO of a partnership-based bank from Bosnia a few years ago, and he told me something very interesting, which was they have a specific department in their bank, which has experts in marketing, accounting for SMEs, all of these experts in it, and they give that access of these experts to all the SMEs, the small and medium enterprises they finance, because they understand that if the SMEs they finance do well, they do well. They are more profitable. So those are two things we're trying to. Those are two issues we're trying to approach in a different manner.
That's incredible. Thank you so much for the transparency in terms of sharing the model, and just really excited about what can be supported and developed and cultivated for farmers globally around this, especially around the yield piece. Like that's phenomenal. So once again, I appreciate you. My next question is, do you have a set of key priorities right now in your work you'd like to amplify or share with our listeners and our viewers?
So again, what we're doing is we're starting another cycle, which is going to be starting in Pakistan. And that's our priority to the next crop cycle, which is going to be in actually a couple of weeks, 2 or 3 weeks, depending on where we are today. So that's one of the things. So, and then after that, what we want to do is we want to evolve into a few other locations around the world. And what we're trying to do is 2 or 3 things, right? We're not only building or facilitating small farmers, we want to build a database of credit worthiness of these farmers based on the steps they took. So we know we have this data of small scale farmers, which has never been done. So a database of small scale farmers knowing what they grow, what is their understanding of the processes and so on and so forth, so we can serve them better and we can help other NGOs. So this is not something we're doing to make money off. That data on farmers, we will share with all the NGOs or governments in those places to ensure that the governments have, like you said, data is very important. I can throw all the money at a problem, but unless I don't understand the data points, all these information, it won't work. And that's been seen in the past. Like people or governments or developmental organizations have thrown money at problems, but unless there's a proper mechanism to address that backed by data, very little. Again, in my humble opinion, I'm not saying I don't have all the answers, but in my humble opinion, that's how we want to approach it. So build a database of small scale farmers from around the world to ensure that everyone else also can leverage off that, and getting financing to the people, the people really farther away from the big cities and all of those, the small scale farmers.
That's incredible. And that data will tell such a rich story of not just the gaps, but the chasms that small scale farmers face. So once again, I think that's remarkable leadership. And if you think about just the data collection, the data stewardship, governance, dissemination around small scale farmers, a lot of times it's owned and it's not shared the way you're planning on sharing it. So I think it's incredible that you're looking at models to be able to share this data to inform practice and policy. So once again, I applaud your leadership and tenacity. So my second last question, what is your ultimate goal? And what does success look like and feel like to you and your colleagues?
So for the startup, the ultimate goal is we want to eventually go to scale and eventually have a uh, database of small scale farmers, something to help us unlock, like you said, some stuff which is there in plain sight, but hidden in data, under data. So that's one of the things we want to do. Because again, I'm really big on data analytics, and that's something which we think we should approach things by analytics rather than just saying, oh, let's try this. You see? So that's one of the things. And the other thing is that the startup, we want to evolve it into the world's first digital agri-bank. So currently you have neobanks or digital banks which don't have branches, but these are all for consumers in cities. But again, like I said, even the digital space is excluding a lot of these people. So we're saying, yes, as a human race, we are moving forward digitally. But unfortunately, even the digital space is exclusion. It's not thinking about these people. And that's what we want to do. We want to be the first digital agri bank which works specifically for small scale farmers. So right now, we're just financing their crop cycle. Eventually, we want to finance their tractors, their even put crop insurance, all of these things, right? So that's our, ultimate goal, or how we want to evolve into something.
That's incredible. Congrats. Congrats.
Well,
Congrats. Yeah.
so
Yeah, indeed, indeed. Alhamdulillah. So with that being said, my brother, do you have any closing thoughts or calls to action for our listeners and our viewers?
again, three things, and this is where I started with this, and I'm going to end with this. Now, like I said, there's 600 million small scale farmers, which are attributable to 40% of our food supply. Currently, the rate at which our population, the human population, is growing, unless we don't make these people productive, we'll have to go towards more deforestation. Okay? Now imagine we already have these people working on fields. If we make them 20, 30, 40% more productive, we're not only having a positive impact from a financial perspective, but also from the Earth's sustainable and all of these perspectives. So that's one of the things. And why is this important? Because, and I'll leave you with a very grim, and I don't like ending with a grim note, but for example, access to finance is such a big issue that these small scale farmers, when they're literally don't have any other avenues or channels, they go to loan sharks, right? And only in India alone, every hour a farmer commits suicide based because of indebtedness, this debt trap, this generational debt trap. And that's just one country. Imagine globally how much of an issue in different places this is. So it is an issue which is not just, oh, let's just deal with it, or it's a good thing to do. You know, it's impacting people's lives in ways we are not even considering, because we are part of the haves. We're not part of the have-nots. Thank God for that. But that also gives us a response. That means that we also have a responsibility, and that's how I live my life. So if I'm lucky that God has put me in a position, that doesn't mean that I don't do anything about it. That is a responsibility. And that's how I would like other people. And even if you're not a believer or whatever, like even if the universe puts you where you are, you do have a responsibility to your kind, your people, to ensure that everyone, at least when by the end of when your life is towards the end, you look back and say, at least I did my part, right? So that's the only thing. And a bit of a grim finish, but I think people should understand that this is a serious problem.
I couldn't agree more. I grew up in East Toronto in Scarborough. When I was 16 in 1999, one of my closest friends committed suicide because of debts. He was involved in something that, and he took his own life. So definitely, I think that anyone that's been close to anyone that committed suicide, especially based off the circumstance you mentioned, it will resonate for them. So I don't think it's grim. I think it's, if anything, life affirming. To call on a call to action around the seriousness in terms of the circumstances and situations that folks face in the margins, the periphery of community and economy, and more importantly, the social isolation that manifests when you're looking at life and debts. So once again, I just give thanks for your tremendous leadership, your candor, your transparency, and your incredible vision for small scale farmers globally and what you're doing locally. So, my father always said, think global, but act local. And you are a living testament to that work, my brother. So, Mujtaba, I just give thanks to the creator for all that you do for so many. And as always, at Setsu, we close all things by giving thanks to our creator, to our sustainer. We give thanks to all the original stewards of the various lands we're on. We give thanks to all our ancestors, all those who toiled without compassion or compensation. We give thanks to all our elders and community stalwarts whose shoulders we stand on as we build, share, and learn together for our collective liberation and sovereignty. Peace to you, my brother. I give thanks for all that you do.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.